so that if anybody happens to not be able to join in on this Zoom, you can all go to the Madison Art Society website and you'll be able to view this art presentation presented by Bob Potter. And the first and the second part are already up on the website for you to view. And it would really be wonderful to go back and see parts 1 and 2 if you did miss those, because this is kind of, it's a building presentation where we start at the very foundation of the country and we're moving forward. Okay, let's begin. I just may every now and then have to admit people to the
Hey,
waiting room.
Judy. Hey, Jude.
Let's make sure everybody is muted. It's extremely important. So I will hit the mute all, and why don't we begin? So good morning, everybody. I'm Hillary Griffin, president of the Madison Art Society, and I welcome you. And I thank you for joining us for part 3 of a 4-part lecture series presented by Bob Potter on the art of America. Before we begin the presentation, I'd like to mention a few technical points about our Zoom presentation to help it run smoothly. First, everybody is muted. So please, if you are not muted for some reason, please make sure that you are muted because we can hear everything that you happen to say. And that may not be the best thing if, if side conversations are going on, we don't want to interrupt our speaker. Bob, he's taken time to present this and prepare his art lecture. So we'd like to be able to hear Bob only. So yes, everybody, please make sure you're muted. And once again, you can look up in the top right corner at the view square. And Bob will be screen sharing. And then you'll see there'll be options as well. The photos of the individual, of the people, the participants will then run down the side, or it will only be the screen that Bob shares, depending on how you choose to view it. So the best way is to simply view the art and maybe not all of the faces, although they won't block Bob's presentation. Let's see. The other thing that's important regarding Zoom is the bottom bar. Let's make sure people are muted. We're hearing some chatter. So please understand that we hear everything that you're saying. So please make sure that you mute. There is a microphone in the bottom left of your taskbar.
Okay,
And that was the last comment I wanted to say, that just please make sure that you are muted. And you will see a raise hand feature if you'd
I
like,
don't, let me
or a
just see.
chat feature, so that you can ask questions during question time, and that will be the time that we ask that you speak, and no other time at all.
FaceTime
Marianne, maybe
each
you
day.
can help me figure out who's
Nick,
where the chatter is coming
yeah,
from.
Nick, you're not muted.
Thank you. And somebody, if you do notice, you can also chat. I mean, I will try to monitor this, but you can send a chat, an individual chat to somebody if you notice and unmute, but I will try to take care of that as well. So let me tell you a little bit about the Madison Art
Excuse
Society.
me, I just interrupt for 1 second.
Yes.
I don't
Mary.
think Irene and William are muted. If you could mute them from
Yeah. Mute all.
Irene's iPad.
Well, let's see. I'm so sorry about these technical little issues that we do need to deal with before we begin, because it could become very, very distracting.
Looks like you've muted everyone, Hillary.
Perfect. Thank you, Bob. So Madison Art Society does welcome you. We have 250 artist members, and we are mainly comprised of artists in Connecticut, around the shoreline, and even beyond. So please check out the Madison Art Society website, madisonartsocietyct.org. You'll see some nice shows up. We have a member show up right now, and we also have a quarantine gallery that we've been posting art to throughout the entire pandemic over the past year. It's $25 to become a member of the Madison Art Society, so we would greatly appreciate it if you would consider doing that to support us.
He's got everybody muted.
That's okay, but I don't hear her talk.
All right, perfect. You'll see member websites on the website. Let's see, what's happening here?
It's Nick who's not, oh, there.
There, I think it should be all set now. I don't know why some just don't, why some of the, when I hit mute all, it just simply doesn't work for some. So anyway, we'll just have to be patient and kind of roll with this. This is Zooming. Alrighty, so there is a member show up now. Please go check that out and you can vote on your favorite painting. That will come down in a few days. Also, we have a jury show to look forward to in August of this summer, and we think it will be in person. So we're thrilled about that, and maybe even an outdoor reception. So look for information about that. I will save more comments about the Madison Art Society for the end. Let's just get moving on Bob's lecture. First, thanks so much to Marianne Dietz for scheduling these events, organizing them. She's done a terrific job. And thanks to Jennifer Corcoran, Jen Thompson, Bev Schermeyer for notifying the public of our demos and our art lectures through press releases, website posts, social media posts, as well through Instagram and Facebook. So let's turn our attention now to this morning's art lecture presented by Bob Potter, who has an impressive background, which I will share with you. Bob Potter is a graduate of Syracuse University School of Visual and Performing Arts. He spent his early career as an art director at Scholastic Magazines, Time Warner, and National Geographic over the past decade. He helped create an arts therapy program for Save the Children, was a corporate development officer for the National Gallery of Art, headed marketing for Mystic Seaport, and is a docent at the Yale Center for British Art. He and his wife, Jean, who is a master watercolorist and teacher, live in Old Lyme, Connecticut. His lecture today is part 3 of a part 4 series titled The Art of America, How Great American Artists Revealed a New Country and Its People. I'm going to jump right to part 3, give you a quick synopsis of what Bob will be presenting, and then we will hand over the reins to Bob. So part 3 deals with the Gilded Age of American Impressionism from 1880 to 1920. In 1873, Mark Twain wrote The Gilded Age, a book that would define and satirize a period of new wealth and prosperity emerging in America. During the next 4 decades, artists like Child Hassam, William Chadwick, William Merritt Chase, and Matilda Brown would celebrate landscapes, still life, and portraits in brushstrokes of vivid color and in compositions infused by natural light in the French Impressionist style now embraced by American artists. Because of Florence Griswold, whose stately sea captain's mansion became the boarding house for many of these artists, the Old Lyme Art Colony would become the home of American Impressionism in the first decades of the 20th century, as artists discovered and painted New England's unspoiled landscapes and natural beauty from the shoreline to backcountry farm fields. I will now hand over the art lecture time to Bob, and I do remind you, please make sure that you are on mute, and we'll have a question period at the end of Bob's presentation. Thank you very much. Bob, take it away.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Hillary, and thanks again to the Madison Art Society.
One moment. Bob, unmute yourself, please.
Sorry, there you go. That's better.
There. Start
can
over,
hear me.
please. I'm sorry.
That's okay. And let's bring it up. And that's the little guy we want. Okay, let's go back here to the beginning. Sorry about that. We want to start at the beginning. There we go. Okay, there we go. So sorry, I just couldn't get to the top of the thing. Here we go. That's more like it. And let's see if we can just change that little screenshot up there. Good. All right. Well, this is the 3rd lecture in our series on the art of America, how great American artists revealed a new country and its people. And I hope you've enjoyed the lectures so far. Today, we're going to look at the Gilded Age and American Impressionism during the period of the late 19th and early 20th century. Mark Twain would define the Gilded Age and its new American wealth in this way. What is the chief end of man? To get rich. In what way? Dishonestly if we can, honestly if we must. In fact, in 1873, he wrote the book that named the era, The Gilded Age, A Tale of Today. It was a novel written by Mark Twain and co-authored by Charles Dudley Warner. The book satirizes greedy politicians, business speculators, and it also has romance, murder, and surefire business deals that go bust. 90% of the nation's families earned less than $1,200 per year by 1890, while some of New York's wealthiest men dined in black tie and tails at 8-course dinners with garlands on their heads. Some were even served on horseback. When millionaire C.K.G. Billings combined his love of horses and fine dining into a lavish dinner on horseback with 36 of his closest male friends. The dinner took place on March 28th, 1903, at Sherry's, New York's ritziest restaurant of the day, on Fifth Avenue and 44th Street. The horses even got a fine meal out of it and were each fed an individual bag of oats. The total cost of this elaborate dinner was $50,000. In today's dollars, that would be around $450,000 to take a group of your friends out to dinner, plus horses. I think you could call this the Gilded Age on geldings. But not to be outdone by the men, the society women of the Gilded Age set the standards for fashion and style, especially in Newport, where the men's straw boaters were no match for the plumed extravaganzas of the women's hats. The it girl of this period was Alice Roosevelt, the eldest child of Teddy Roosevelt's 6 children. She was the inspiration for the Gibson girl, the idealized American beauty created by artist Dana Gibson. In her 1902 debutante photograph, she strikes a pose of grace and beauty, her chin held high, wearing a flowing golden silk gown. It reminds me of a classic John Singer Sargent portrait, painted a few years later, of Lady Mary Astor, especially in how she poses for the painter. John Singer Sargent's portraits of the rich and famous define the Gilded Age and remain among the greatest portraits ever done. Sargent was born in 1856 in Florence. His father was a brilliant eye surgeon in Philadelphia. But after the death of John's older sister at the age of 2, his mother, Mary, who was an amateur artist, suffered a nervous breakdown. And the family moved to Florence and wandered the social seasons in Europe. Sargent demonstrated a precocious talent for drawing and studied art as a young boy in Rome. And after his family moved to Paris, he was accepted into the studio of Carolus Duran, becoming his star pupil. Sargent was only 23 when he pays homage to his beloved teacher in this portrait. When the National Gallery of Art in Washington had a major Sargent exhibition a number of years ago, my wife and I found ourselves looking at this portrait and discovered standing next to us was the artist Jamie Wyeth. Sargent's portraits display a modern impressionist flair in how he lavishes his subjects in painterly brushstrokes of color in settings that share an intimate moment between the artist and subject. This painting, done in 1911, called Repose, hangs in the National Gallery of Art in Washington. The woman is Sargent's niece, Rose Marie Ormond Michel. Here, Sargent abandons a traditional posed portrait and depicts her as an anonymous young woman who looks as if she could be daydreaming. The ease with which Sargent uses paint and brushstrokes to sculpt the contours, colors, light, and shadow of her shawl and flowing dress convey a rich statement of elegance and at the same time nonchalance, which was the original name of the painting. Even though Sargent would become the most sought after of society painters, he would complain, and I quote, "I have long been sick and tired of portrait painting. And when I was painting my own mug, I firmly decided to devote myself to other branches of art as soon as possible." But society portrait commissions brought Sargent fame and fortune, and no wonder. Looking at this ravishing portrait of Lady Agnew, painted in 1893. It was a portrait commissioned by her husband when she was 37 years old. Everything about this portrait is rich in color and languid in her relaxed pose, hallmarks of Sargent's portraits of women. Dressed in a flowing lavender gown, seated in an 18th century French chair, she looks at you with a slightly quizzical half smile that gives the impression she has just paused in an intimate conversation with you. In later years, Lady Agnew would be forced to sell her portrait to help fund her very costly lifestyle. Sargent also painted many of the most notable writers and artists of his day. I love his portrait of author Robert Louis Stevenson, painted in 1885. Stevenson had become famous for Treasure Island, Kidnapped, and around the time of this painting, had conceived the idea for his novel Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Sargent's double portrait of the newly married couple, Mr. and Mrs. Stokes, was done in 1897, and it hangs in the Met. A friend of the couple had commissioned a portrait of just the young bride, and Sargent initially selected an evening gown for her to wear. But he soon decided to portray the young Mrs. Stokes in her stylish, fashionable street clothes instead of a fancy gown. And the original idea was to have her posing with a Great Dane dog at her side. Then her husband, as husbands often do, had a sudden inspiration. And when the dog became unavailable for his portrait, he offered to assume the role of the Great Dane. And in the final painting, there he stands behind his wife, And the result is a youthful, vibrant couple full of life and personality. In a word, modern. His full-length portrait of Dr. Pawsey was inspired by Velázquez. I don't know whose idea it was to wear the long red robe against the red velvet curtains, but it makes the portrait a knockout. The doctor looks more like a church cardinal in ecclesiastical red robes. But Dr. Pawsey wasn't a cardinal or a priest, but a French gynecologist whose pioneering work advanced the reproductive safety and sexual health for women in the late 1800s. Although married with 3 children, Dr. Pawsey was a notorious womanizer and indulged in many affairs, including one with the actress Sarah Bernhardt. We see her there in one of her great roles as Cleopatra from 1891. Sadly, Dr. Pawsey's life would end tragically. A former patient had claimed the doctor had caused him to become impotent when he amputated his leg, and the patient demands that Dr. Pawsey operate again to cure the problem. When Dr. Pawsey refuses, the patient shoots him 4 times in the stomach. The doctor died of his wounds shortly thereafter, and the patient would later commit suicide. Sargent's portrait of Dr. Pawsey would be the first work he exhibited at the Royal Academy in London in 1882. Sargent's most controversial and possibly most famous portrait was of Madame X. Her name was Virginie Gautreau, and she was a New Orleans-born Parisian socialite. In the original version, Sargent accentuated her sensuality even more by dropping the strap off of her gown on her right shoulder. The public's reaction was scandalous. Even Parisians weren't prepared for the sight of a society woman displaying a naked shoulder. Sargent was compelled to repaint the shoulder strap, but fled for Paris, from Paris to London, and contemplated giving up painting portraits forever. Sargent kept the painting of X in his studio for the next 30 years, until he finally offered it to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in 1916. Writing to the museum's director, he said, "I suppose it is the best thing I have ever done." And he asked the museum director to disguise her name. Therefore, Madame X. In his elegant portraits of the rich and famous, Sargent was also documenting the end of an era, which would vanish with the coming social and political upheavals of the early 20th century. But before the Gilded Age would vanish, all this new wealth, culture, and leisure continues to flourish in America. And American art and artists would be profoundly influenced by French Impressionism that celebrated light, color, and the freedom of expressive brushstrokes, recording everyday life. In this 1892 landscape painting by William Merritt Chase, a painting called At the Seaside, in this painting, American Impressionism is in its full glory. In this self-portrait, artist William Merritt Chase looks like a New York Gilded Age millionaire with his flowing white goatee and pince-nez glasses. But he was born in Indiana, a Midwesterner, the oldest of 6 children of a modestly successful shoe merchant. In 1872, after studies at New York's National Academy of Design, where he dazzled with his artistic abilities, Chase was asked by a group of wealthy businessmen who were also art lovers. They asked Chase if he would like to study in Europe with their financial support. Chase is said to have replied, "My God, I'd rather go to Europe than go to heaven." Chase shares with the French Impressionists a passion for plein air painting, setting up his easel and brushes outdoors to paint on location, like this windswept sunny day at the Shinnecock Beach near Southampton on Long Island. His fluid and dynamic brushstrokes of color embody everything he admired about the French Impressionists, and he captures everything one could hope for on the perfect summer day at the beach. Here is fruit in their white summer cottons, having a picnic against a landscape of green grass, sandy beaches, and blue waves. And he accents it all with the woman's bright red bonnet. Chase would adapt French Impressionism to contemporary scenes like these of Americans at the beach, and in doing so, garnered worldwide appreciation of American art. Chase was quite adamant about how to paint a landscape. He would say, "I don't believe in making pencil sketches and then painting landscapes in your studio. You must be right under the sky." After Japan opened to the West in the mid-19th century, the influence of Japan on arts, sculpture, and decorative arts was enormously popular, especially as an inspiration for the Impressionists. Claude Monet had his first wife, Camille, pose in a heavily decorated red kimono, holding a fan, with more fans decorating the walls and strewn on the floor. At the time of this painting in 1876, Monet was desperate for money after his father cut off his allowance. And it was thought he painted this strictly for money to cash in on the immense popularity of Japanese influence on art. William Merritt Chase acquired a collection of Japanese costumes and textiles for the sitters in his studio and painted several portraits of women in Japanese dress. In this painting, Spring Flowers, Peonies, done in 1889, he uses pastels on paper to extraordinary effect. Chase was a leader in the late 19th century revival of pastel painting and one of its most innovative practitioners. His subject wears a vibrant red kimono, reminiscent of Monet's painting, and she holds a fan as she gazes at a bowl overflowing with fresh cut peonies. He also dresses this model in Japanese costume, which not only presented glorious color and patterns to paint, including the orange sash, but would have been considered quite a stylish and daring fashion statement for any woman of the period. Chase seems to have an endless fascination with painting women in kimonos, and here he poses the model in a midnight blue satin kimono against a background of gold in a tour de force of color. In this portrait, entitled The Young Orphan, painted in 1884, instead of kimonos and fans, the sitter wears a flowing dress of black in a sea of red, looking directly at the viewer. The young girl very likely came from the orphan asylum located next door to Chase's 10th Street studio in New York City. Chase's mastery of color and composition could make even a still life of onions, a bowl, and platter become a visual meditation in color, shapes, lights, and darks, and brilliant reflections. It was painted in 1912, only a few years before his death. This self-portrait is one of Chase's last paintings, completed shortly before his death at the age of 67 in 1916. Here he is in his studio. He holds a palette and his brushes and is still a vigorous and productive artist. The painting on the easel is in the earliest stages of his imagination, holding out hope that much more is to come from the painter. But sadly, that was not to be. William Merritt Chase was not only a great painter, but a great teacher, and he was considered the most important American teacher of art of his generation. He taught at the Art Students League of New York, the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, and later at his own Chase School of Art, which since has become the Parsons School of Design. Supporting his large family demanded he teach as much as he painted. His teaching would impact the lives of thousands of students and would inspire the next generation of American artists, from Marsden Hartley to Edward Hopper. Among his many outstanding pupils was Georgia O'Keeffe, who would say about her teacher, and I quote, "There was something fresh and energetic and fierce and exacting about him that made him fun." Child was born in Boston in 1859 and came from a long line of New Englanders. Nathaniel Hawthorne was an ancestor of his mother. Like Winslow Homer, whose work we looked at in our last lecture, Haslam also began his career as an illustrator for magazines like Harper's Weekly. He had little formal art training, but like many artists before him and his contemporaries, he traveled to Europe to study the masters. He greatly admired the works of J.M.W. Turner. After moving to New York in 1889, he fell in love with the city, and it certainly shows. His depiction of New York are among some of his finest works. The Metropolitan Museum of Art has praised him as the foremost chronicler of New York City at the turn of the 20th century. His love of New York cityscapes was an early passion, like this painting of a spring day in Washington Square Park, painted in 1893. And except for the horse-drawn carriages, it probably looks very much like this today if we were down in New York. He loves painting nighttime scenes of New York in the snow. What's so stunning about these paintings is how he captures atmosphere and light, the winter fog, the color of snow as it blankets and silhouettes people and carriages, light reflecting on the street, and the faintest suggestions of buildings in the distance. These are masterworks of urban impressionism. In his panoramic scene of a rainy day in Boston, you might think, have I seen this painting before? It should look perhaps a little bit familiar, but you may be thinking of another great and very similar wide angle composition of a rainy street by the French impressionist Gustave Cabot and his painting Paris Street, Rainy Day. Now, there's probably a very good chance that Hassam would have seen this painting while in Paris. And they do have a striking resemblance, don't they? Except for the figures in the foreground, very, very similar paintings and great paintings. But I think that's enough of rainy days. Let's let some sunlight in, as we are seeing here in Old Lyme today. The sun has come out, and sunlight is one of the main ingredients of an impressionist painting. Hassam really lets summer sunlight infuse everything in this painting. Colors of yellows and greens, in a painting called The Goldfish Window, done in 1916. I think he probably had really had enough of snowy New York. Hassam began painting The Goldfish Window at the Holly House in Coscob, Connecticut, down in Greenwich. Coscob is one of the sister American Impressionist art colonies, similar to that of the Old Lyme art colony of the early 20th century. Child Hassam, like Sargent and William Merritt Chase, created scenes of women in repose, relaxed, and reclining. In this painting, the woman in a flowing green dress can barely compete with the explosion of yellows in the Japanese screen in the background. Hassam and his fellow American Impressionists would glorify flowers in painterly detail of rich, thick brushstrokes of color. He particularly loved the gardens of Celia Thaxter, and his paintings of her gardens are considered among his masterworks. Celia Thaxter was a prominent poet whose writings praised nature, and especially the rugged Maine seashore. Hassam visited her family's hotel on Appledore Island in Maine, which was a gathering place for artists and writers, including Ralph Waldo Emerson, Nathaniel Hawthorne, and Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. In this painting, Hassam immortalizes Celia Thaxter in her flower garden. Hassam painted a series of more than 30 American flag paintings on Fifth Avenue in New York, like this painting, American Flags, from 1916. This American flag painting, Avenue in the Rain, has been in the White House since the Kennedy administration. And during President Obama's administration, it was prominently displayed in the Oval Office, as you can see on the wall just across from the Resolute desk. During the previous administration, however, it was replaced with a portrait of Abraham Lincoln. But the flag painting is happily back on view in the current occupant's office. A personal favorite of mine is Hassam's painting of the Old Lyme Congregational Church, which is just a short walk from our home. Painted in 1905 on a glorious autumn day in New England. Another favorite subject to paint in Old Lyme was this stately old sea captain's house at the opposite end of Main Street from the First Congregational Church. Artists like Matilda Brown would paint it bathed in summer sunlight. And Willard Metcalf would capture moonlight on the pillars and a ghost-like figure on the front lawn, a woman in white. The old sea captain's house would be inherited by his daughter, Florence Griswold. Florence Griswold was not a painter, but she was a muse to the American Impressionists, and as much as these artists made Old Lyme, Connecticut, an artist colony in the early 20th century, an artist colony that continues today. She inherited her father's house along with its debt. And hoping to make ends meet, she turned it into a boarding house, which was an acceptable occupation for a single woman at the time. The boarding house could easily accommodate up to a dozen artists in the 6 guest rooms and the attic spaces above. The artist Alphonse Jongers spent the summers between 1900 and 1904 in Old Lyme and painted this portrait of Florence Griswold playing her harp. Florence Griswold would say of the artists who boarded at her home, and I quote, "So you see, at first the artists adopted Lyme, then Lyme adopted the artists. And now, today, Lyme and art are synonymous." Much like Monet's idyllic Painter's Eden and art colony in Giverny, France, Old Lyme would become an American Giverny for these artists. Matilda Brown, one of the few women artists of the group, painted the peonies in nearby gardens. The artists would set up their easels on the nearby Lieutenant River that flows behind Florence Griswold's house. It's here that Willard Metcalf paints the Kalmia growing wild along the river banks. The Lieutenant River behind the Florence Griswold house remains a favorite spot for artists to paint today. In warm weather, the artists gathered for lunch on the side porch of the house. That's Child Hassan in the striped shirt, turning to the camera and giving the photographer the eye. The side porch was a great place to have lunch on a summer's day. And isn't it interesting how formal artists looked? They all have their ties on, and they had them on when they painted. It was also the perfect setting for a painting by William Chadwick of a woman in a flowered summer dress and summer hat with dappled light and shadow on the white tablecloth, and a view of the gardens seen in the distance. The Florence Griswold house was not only a home for the American Impressionists, but it also became the summer White House for President Woodrow Wilson, whose wife was an artist. The artists who boarded at Miss Florence's house were a who's who of American Impressionism, posing together on the front steps and occasionally performing an impromptu theatrical production. But as much fun as these artists had together, they were each quite serious about their own art. They were inspired by the landscapes around Old Lyme and would glorify these in plein air paintings through the seasons. Willard Metcalf paints dogwood blossoms in the spring. Will Howe Foote creates a Seurat-like pointillism painting of a garden beginning to bloom. Frank Vincent Dumont frames a country lane with an old wooden gate left open to green summer fields in a painting called Top of the Hill, done in 1906. Alan Butler Talcott uses thick impasto paint to depict a rocky pasture with its towering oak. In this 1907 painting called The Ledges, October, Old Lyme, Child Hassan contrasts the soft golden leaves of autumn against blue and gray shadows on the boulders below, boulders which rolled and stopped there in the Ice Age. With the exception of Florence Griswold and a few women art students, the Old Lyme Art Colony was a man's world of artists, seen here in a comical painting called The Fox Chase, painted on one of the dining room wood panels in her house. The artists would sometimes refer to themselves as the Hot Air Club, and the Old Lyme Art Colony as a place for high thinking and low living. Most of the female artists who came to Lyme were students of the men who considered themselves professional artists. And the women were dismissed as amateurs and not to be taken seriously. The men even encouraged Miss Florence not to rent them rooms in the boarding house. The artists called these female students blots on the landscape, a snide play on words referencing the Italian Renaissance painter Sandro Botticelli. Willard Metcalf went so far as to even title his painting of his 15-year-old art student, Lois Wilcox, "Poor Little Blot Achille." As insulting as the painting's title is, he paints her portrait with a masterful command and flair of brushwork and color. Look how he captures the play of light and shadow in her hat and blouse, on her face. It's one of my favorite paintings by Metcalf because it looks and feels so fresh and spontaneous, even if he meant it as a put down. Now, Metcalf may have dismissed her as a blot, but Lois Wilcox went on to have an active and distinguished career as an artist, illustrator, and teacher. In 1913, she would have a solo exhibition at the Detroit Institute of Arts, and the 1920s exhibited at the Whitney Museum of American Art. From 1933 to 1946, she taught drawing and painting at Sweetbriar College in Virginia. Her painting, Little Willows, on the left, incorporates all the hallmarks of American Impressionism and is as delicate, even though as it appears to be painted. In the close-up detail on the right, we can see her confident command of paint, color, vigorous brushstrokes. A painting that I think rivals in technique, composition, and painterly control any of the landscapes of the Old Lyme men. One woman artist in the Old Lyme art colony would gain the men's respect. Artistically, she was very much their equal, having trained with master artists and garnered a number of prestigious awards. By the time she came to Old Lyme in 1905, at the age of 36. Her name was Matilda Brown. She grew up in Newark, New Jersey. Next door to the artist, Thomas Moran, the painter of monumental Western landscapes we all met in our first lecture on the art of America. Thomas Moran would allow the 8-year-old Matilda Brown to watch him paint in his studio. And eventually, he gave her her own brushes, paints, and canvas to experiment with. As she grew older, she loved painting farm animals, particularly cows, and traveled with her mother to Europe to study animal painters in France and Holland. Her mother would buy calves from the local fair to serve as models. And when the painting was finished, the calf was traded in for another. This painting by Matilda Brown of a calf displays such wonderful painterly strokes of dark browns and blacks, surrounded by yellow-green grass. In this painting, a herd of cows pause at a watering hole with a hint of fall in the air as leaves begin to turn gold in the background. If painting cows was a love of Matilda Brown, painting flower gardens may have been her true passion. American women in this time saw the garden as not only a beautiful oasis, but an important political space for women, a private world of self-expression. Brown herself was a gardener and knew firsthand what went into a garden's creation and cultivation. Her painting entitled "In the Garden," done in 1915, expresses all of these themes. A woman in a flowering robe of color becomes one with the flowers she is tending, as shadow and light model the scene. In close-up detail, the bravado of her brushstrokes of color reminds me of abstract expressionism and the paintings of William de Kooning. Paintings that are nearly 50 years in the future. Matilda Brown's flower garden paintings are compositions that not only celebrate the paintings of a bed of peonies, but they express a joy of being surrounded and almost overwhelmed by color and beauty for both the subject of the painting and the viewer of the painting. Matilda Brown's art studio still stands at Old Lyme on our main street, and it's just a short walk from our house. Florence Griswold's home is just a few blocks away as well. When I was taking these pictures the other day, I got to meet Dr. Richard Jones, the new owner, along with his wife Carol, of the house next door. It's on his property that Matilda Brown's art studio sits today. Florence Griswold also loved to garden and filled her boarding house with fresh cut flowers. In a photo from 1925, taken later in her life, she poses amongst her flowers. And I like to think she was the inspiration for the figure in Matilda Brown's painting. Florence Griswold's legacy of making a home for the American Impressionists would expand beyond her boarding house to the Lyme Art Association Gallery, which sits next door, that she helped to create with funding from the artists. It was designed by the artist and architect and landscape designer, Charles Platt, who also designed the Freer Gallery in Washington, D.C., and the Lyman Allen Museum in New London. Platt envisioned a small art museum with high ceilings and skylights to showcase the artist's work. In 1921, the Lyme Art Association opened its doors and became the center of summer social life in Old Lyme, and it continues today as an arts center for the exhibition and education of professional and amateur artists alike. I was the director of the Lyme Art Association for a number of years, and the building and artists remain near and dear to my heart. When the gallery first opened, Florence Griswold was the first director. So it's nice to have been connected to her in this way. When Matilda Brown painted Miss Florence's house in 1910, it would have been hard to imagine that one day in the future, another art gallery would be built within steps of her summer side porch. In 2002, the Kriebel Gallery opened to showcase the art of the American Impressionists and the works of contemporary artists who embrace their spirit. In addition to year-round exhibitions at the Kriebel Gallery, there's a wonderful tradition over the holidays of displaying Miss Florence's Christmas trees throughout the galleries, decorated with hand-painted palettes by contemporary artists from the old Lyme community today. One of my favorites of these palettes is painted by one of my favorite artists, my wife, G. And it shows the young Florence Griswold and her iconic house, which the American Impressionists called home. That concludes our art lecture today on the Gilded Age and American Impressionism. I hope you enjoyed it. And I do want to remind you about the last lecture in the series on Tuesday, May 11th, same time, same place, same Zoom. The last lecture will be entitled American Boom and Bust. And we'll be looking at art during the Great Depression, where American Impressionism will dramatically change to a new American realism. I hope you all will join me again. Thank you. And now I think we have some time for any questions or comments, and I will stop sharing the big screen, but we can always come back to it. And should be able to open up and view any.
Yeah, anybody. Thank you, Bob. You've done it again. You've taught us all so many new things, and you've kept us riveted as you always do.
Well,
So
thank you.
anybody that has a question, you can use your raise hand feature, or maybe just unmute yourself and, you know, you can call your question out, as long as we all try not to speak over each other. Anybody out there with some questions?
I have a question on the chat line.
Oh, okay. Why don't you read that for us, if you might?
Mr. Potter, that was such a fascinating lecture. Could you please comment on the composition of William M. Chase's last self-portrait? I was struck by the absence of a central focus.
Good, I sure will. Let me see if I can pull that up. Hang on 1 second. I used to be a little faster at that. Hold on. Let me go find that for you. Okay, let's bring that up. All right, hold on. Whoops. Okay. Here we go. There we go. Good. Okay, let's see if I can screen share that for you. Okay. Ah, boy, that isn't working. Sorry about that. Hang on. Hang on.
Yes, the
yeah.
technology. Oh, the
All right.
technology.
Are we seeing the painting or not?
No.
Okay, hold on. For some reason, I seem to have lost my. There we go. Here we go. I don't know what that. Oh, I do apologize for not being able to share that easily. Hold on, I don't know what we're doing here. But we're not doing the screen share.
We're all very understanding. This is always a bit
I just,
challenging.
I'm just not. Here we go. So sorry. So sorry. That should work. Let's see what we got out of that one. Okay.
Great.
How about that?
Yes, that's the one.
Voila.
Uh-huh.
Well, it does have a central focus in terms of its composition. It's a self-portrait. It's the artist in his studio.
Mhm.
And a couple of things. Number one, it's the beginning of the process. It's the blank canvas, just with some marks on the canvas. But also his studio was a gathering spot. It was in many ways like a salon for artists and writers and friends. And so what he's doing here is showing us his world where he creates art. And he's also giving us a sense of the workspace. We see on the left, we see his cabinets. We see objects. we see on the right a little bit of the background. In the foreground, we see his table with paints. His palette he holds in his left hand and his brushes. So I think in this regard, it's a very intimate painting that he's showing us. This is where I work. This is where, when I'm not out under the clouds on plein air, in the studio, and we might imagine that maybe over to our far right, out of frame, possibly one of those models in those flowing Japanese kimono dresses, holding a fan against a setup that has a beautiful golden Japanese screen behind it. So if this were a film, the camera might start to pan around the room and we would cut to what he might be painting. But good question. And I appreciate you taking time to really kind of look at the art. I hope I didn't go too fast through the art. Good question. Any other comments or questions? I think I can find the artwork a little faster this time if you do.
Well, we have some chat questions and comments. Why don't I read a couple? Let's see. Okay, we just did that one. So people are saying wonderful, delightful. Thank you so much. From Diane, Hodrat, and Colleen. Terrific. Margaret
See that
Mann.
Nancy Armstrong raised her hand. Maybe you can see her and she can unmute herself and just perhaps
Yes,
shout
go
out.
ahead, Nancy.
Yeah.
Well, I need to find Nancy if Nancy is unable to unmute herself. So let's see.
Now I did.
Perfect, Nancy. Thank you.
I'm thinking of Joseph Mallard William Turner, who was known to add a very sharp dab of red paint to draw the eye to something important in his painting, draw the eye to his painting. And I'm looking at the William Merritt Chase palette, and he's got that big dab of red. And I think that sort of pulls your eye in first.
It does. Good eye on that. Let's
Mm.
bring that up. Yeah.
That's all.
No, it's a good comment. And again, you've got such an expansive landscape here. There's a lot going on. And yet the figures, the four figures are the kind of central visual anchor. I mean, they put us in the scene, don't they? But without that kind of red hat on the central lady, it kind of might be a little hard to focus. So good point. And I think we remember in the Turner movie where he goes into the Royal Academy and daubs the red paint on the buoy out in the middle of the Marinescape as the other artists are standing around wondering, what is he doing? Yes, I see a hand raised. Shout it out. Uh-oh, can't hear you. Unmute yourself. No, unmute yourself.
Who is it, Bob?
It's Del Surf, whoever. Everybody could unmute themselves now.
Yeah. I'm not going to unmute everybody
Oh, okay.
because some people.
Rosemary Salippi.
There you go.
Perfect.
Yeah, what's your question?
Okay, Rosemary, just bear with me. If
Rosemary
Rosemary, can
Philippi.
you see your unmute? If not, I will get to you. Or Bob, maybe you can as well, if whoever gets to Rosemary first.
Sure.
Not finding her.
Okay.
SCR, Sirlipi.
So sorry for these technical
right.
little
Bob,
realities.
can I ask you, one of the paintings that you showed is at the Cooley Gallery. Can you tell us a little bit about the Cooley Gallery?
Oh, I'd be delighted to. Hang on one second, and I'm trying to think which one that was.
I don't remember either, but
Yeah. Hang on one second there. Maybe I can. Okay, what do I have here? Let's see. It's going to be within our American Impressionist group, and bear with me 1 minute. Let's see if we might find that. It's not that I know. Don't know. Well, we'll just see. We'll just fire these guys up. There we go. Hey, voila. The Cooley Gallery is just about halfway between the First Congregational Church and Matilda Brown's house, and about halfway between the church and the Florence Griswold house. And Jeff and Betsy Cooley are the wonderful longtime owners of the Cooley Gallery. And within their gallery are just masterworks of American Impressionism. And so when you come and visit in Old Lyme, give a call first so you can arrange an appointment. Same with the Florence Griswold Museum. Right now, again, call first, make an appointment. But Jeff and Betsy, not only do they have one of the great collections of American Impressionist art within their gallery, but there also have been forever some of the greatest supporters of the arts in Old Lyme. So you'll enjoy meeting them, and tell them Bob said hi, and stop by and see what else they have on view. When I pulled this particular painting up, I pulled it up from Google Images. And when I looked for the credit line, it had it at that time I pulled it up, the Cooley Gallery. I can't guarantee that it is still on view, might have been sold, that is their business. But again, you'll have an opportunity to see some really remarkable examples of the American Impressionists there at their gallery.
Thank you, Bob.
Marie
Now,
Orlando, unmute yourself and we can hear you. You have your hand up.
Well, Rosemary would you like to ask your question, Rosemary? Oh, hang on. I have you as unmuted. Something's going wrong because you need to unmute yourself now. I don't know why it's not working. She is unmuted on my end. Rosemary, I'm so sorry. Guess you need to just find the microphone, make sure it doesn't have a red line through it, because I have unmuted you. So now I guess there's something required on your end. Maybe you can chat your question so that we get to hear what your thoughts are.
Right, if you go down to the bottom, that little chat icon, you can just click and write out a question and that'll go into Marianne and Hillary.
Exactly.
Were there any other questions from the audience? You can just shout them out if you're unmuted or unmute yourself.
Well, Nancy Schroeder says thank you so much.
You're welcome.
She enjoyed the lesser known facts, which intrigue and invite further research, which is so true.
Well, hopefully that is one of the takeaways from these lectures. We do cover a lot of art, a lot of artists, hope not too much. We try to thematically group them, and hopefully it does spark some interest in doing some further research. Wikipedia, go to Google Images, input the artist's name, see more examples of their works, or even better, go to the source. It might be the Florence Griswold Museum, it might be the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Go to the original sources where the paintings are now in collections, if they're not in private collections, and input the name and open it up and read more, because quite often, again, you will find wonderful essays by historians and curators and experts on a particular work of art. In fact, if you go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and I just discovered this the other day, go to their website, open up John Singer Sargent. There's a fantastic essay on Sargent's paintings and how he paints hands. And those artists out there who've sat in on these lectures, who do portrait work, figurative work, also know that painting hands is quite hard. But this is just a terrific essay. So that's a great example. Hopefully this is the kind of impetus, the inspiration to go and research and discover more on your own. I discover a lot when I put these together. I had not seen that photograph of Sargent in his studio with the Madame X painting. I know that he kept the painting through most of his life until he gave it to the Met, but I'd never seen a photograph. Wasn't that cool to see him there in his studio? And there's the painting on an easel. So yeah, go explore. Google Images is a great place to go. Wikipedia, but even better, go to the museums themselves and learn more about these artists. The Florence Griswold Museum has a very nice website and lots of essays on all of these different artists and Florence Griswold. In fact, I knew at one point, but I forgot that President Wilson made the Florence Griswold house his summer White House for many years. Even at one point, he and his wife were thinking about buying a home in Old Lyme after his presidency. Sadly, he didn't live long enough to do that. He got quite sick after the Versailles peace treaties and ran his health into the ground as a result of that. Any
Wow.
other questions?
Can I
Yes,
read a
Bob?
few more? Oh, excuse me. Go ahead, Marie. Excuse
I
me.
have one. I find it interesting that you mentioned hands. I noticed the portrait of Dr. Pazzi, I believe it was. I'm not sure if that was Sargent, but
It was
the hand-
Sargent.
the hands were very delicate, almost like women's hands.
Good eye. Again, you get another star for astute observation. Let me pull that up because that portrait, in fact, is included in the Metropolitan Museum essay on Sargent's hands. And let's get on up there. There you go. So let's pull that up. Eventually, slowly. Get up. There, almost there. Okay. Voila. There you go. Yeah. Look at his left hand. He has the finger just on the red sash rope belt of his red gown. Just that one finger resting on that, his left hand, and then his right hand. And I wish I could blow that up for you more. You see how his right hand, and he's has his hand and his fingers. The painting is almost as much about hands and the pose. He can, of course, kind of paint portraits practically with his eyes closed. But it's Dr. Posey at home. And it's just remarkably elegant. And I think you also sense, and I think most people would agree, when the artist, the portrait artist, really is interested in the person and the subject he's painting, it comes through in the painting. Sargent was an admirer of men. And this portrait of this very, very handsome guy. Oops, sorry, I'm going to get back to him in just a minute. See if we can't just see that. Here we go. You can even see there in a black and white photograph, which looks contemporaneous to the portrait, doesn't it? So Sargent has a just unbelievably handsome guy, you know, to heartthrob, to paint. So go for broke. Red robe, red background. I mean, and if you look way down at those embroidered slippers, it's something. But you can see he's quite a dandy in his photograph as well. So yeah, painting hands in these portraits. The one of, I think before, let me just see where there we go. Look at Robert Louis Stevenson's fingers. They're like little spider fingers, aren't they? As he's holding that cigarette in his right hand. In his left hand. It just, they're just these, again, these elongated fingers, and they're so, you get a sense of this very skinny, frail person. You get a sense that Sargent is just having a ball painting this portrait, because he also has one of the most interesting authors in the world there in front of him. But there's nothing stuffy. There's nothing formal. There's nothing stiff. It's as fresh and impressionistic as any painting of Manet or Monet or any, if you think of Renoir, it's alive, it's fresh, it's in the moment. That's why his portraits few have been surpassed since Sargent.
Bob, you had a picture of the tea party in front of the Lime Art Gallery.
Yeah.
Lime Art Association, and this summer we're celebrating our 100th anniversary out there, and there's going to be a tea party out there that people can attend and then see. We're going to be looking at impressionist paintings of the artists today and your interpretation of them as the exhibit during that time frame.
Oh, I'm so glad you mentioned that. There we are in 1921.
And so it's 2021. So this summer in August, there'll be Lime Art Association garden party.
Yeah, that's just great. And those of you who've been to the Lime Art Association the past few years or live here in Old Lyme have watched how the Art Association has done such a magnificent restoration of the exterior, the shingled exterior of the building designed by Charles Platt. And it's just outstanding what they've done. And if you haven't been inside, those of you who are still on the lecture, you owe it to yourself to go in, because as you drive by, it looks kind of like an imposing sort of New England shingled architectural vernacular. And you walk in, and you walk into 4 magnificent galleries that are skylit. And it's the perfect small museum. And if you go on Google Images and look up the Freer Gallery in Washington, D.C., and look at the facade, you'll see Platt's very similar architectural with those little small, windows across the top. That building is, of course, in stone, not New England shingled. But the time Platt was designing the Lime Art Association building, he'd never designed an art gallery before. So he's kind of, he's been in a lot of them. He understands architecture. He understands everything he's trying to do here, but hasn't done one before. So I like to think that he was kind of, well, yes, that's how an art gallery works. And keep in mind, it's natural lighting, and then some sort of little electrical lights here and there. But the roof is skylights front and back. And the upper part of the Lime Art Association building up in the rafters, which I've been up in many times, but don't go up there in the middle of the summer. It's a little bit warm. But I've been up there, and it looks like the way a boat would be built, because it's the big wooden rafters that you would see in building a boat, and probably some boatswains were there helping build this building. It's really quite magnificent up above in the attic. but most magnificent down through the galleries. So yeah, great celebration coming up in August, 100 years. And thanks to Miss Florence. And by the way, those chairs that you see there on the front lawn are still there in storage there at the Lyme Art Association. They're a beautiful kind of painted chalky emerald green with a hutch straw type seat.
Wow. May I ask, will there be any kind of restrictions due to the virus, Bev, for that gathering?
They're going to have the RSVP, just like you do at the Florence Griswold. So when they have the celebration, during the day will be a garden party, and at night will be a cocktail party, and then a wet paint sale, and artists will be plein air painting throughout Old Lyme.
Wow, very nice.
Beverly, did I miss anything important on the Lyme Art Association? It's great to have someone, an expert like you here.
No, except that if you're gonna be, you'll go online at the Lyme Art Association, and you can see some of the places where you could start plein air painting to get ready for the exhibition. So we just listed, I think just this week, all the different areas, and you could sign up for plein air painting.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Excellent.
Well, maybe the Madison Art Society and the Lyme Art Association can do a little cross marketing.
Good idea.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's what it takes. Artists supporting artists, art organizations, and it's a real plus, because we all are very lucky to live in this part of the world where the American Impressionists called their home, at least during the seasons.
It's really great. Well, Bob, I guess maybe we'll wrap it up. Is there one last question out there? If not,
I see Jane Gordon has a comment.
okay, Jane, go ahead. Here we
She
go.
says, Weir Farm National Park, surprisingly, is the only national park in Connecticut. Childy has them spend time living there. Beautiful place to visit.
Yeah. Yes, we're, of course, being one of the great artists as well. So yeah, and Weir Farm. And is the Weir Farm down in the Coscob Greenwich area?
No, that's not. It might be more.
It's
Is
in
it
Wilton.
Canaan?
In
Oh, it's in-
Wilton,
It's
the
in
Wilton
the Wilton
area.
area? Okay.
Where is
Yeah.
it, Jane?
It's on the borderline of New York, really, and Connecticut, right there in that pocket. It's
Very
beautiful
nice.
to visit.
Coscob, the Greenwich site is Bush Holly House. So that's where I grew up in Coscob. Boy, I didn't even realize what was right under my feet. Anyway, yeah,
Well, in
so many
fact, that's
positive
the,
comments.
That's that
Go.
wonderful painting, and we'll just close with that. Wonderful painting of the, that's a faster way to do it, Bob. Let's get out there, here we go. And there we are. We'll close with that. The goldfish window at the Bush Holly House down there in Coscob, in Hillary's former backyard.
It is. It's a couple of miles away. My parents are still down there. All right. Well, again, Bob, wonderful lecture. Thank you so much. And for those of you that missed parts 1 and parts 2, please go to our website. You can see those. And we very much look forward to part 4, which will be America Boom and Bust on Tuesday, May 11th, same time. So the second Tuesday of the coming month. A couple more announcements very quickly from the Madison Art Society. On June 2nd, we'll have Zufar Bikbov with an art demo. And he's a really very accomplished, very well-known painter, nationally recognized, probably internationally recognized. In addition, we will have Paul Batch do a demo for us on October 15th. And just a reminder that we will have our juried show at the Scranton Memorial Library. We hope that will be in person. We think it will be in August, and we hope to have a reception as well. So everybody, thank you for Zooming with us. And we will see all of you on May 11th next month. Marianne, again, thank you. And Bob, thank you so much.
Thank you,
Take care.
everyone, and
Thank
have
you.
a great spring day, and we'll hopefully see you on Tuesday, May the 11th. Bye-bye
Thank
now.
you, Ed.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you so
everybody.
much. It's been wonderful.
Bye-bye.
Wonderful.
Bob.
Thank you.